My hands were shaking when I started typing this. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, not panic, not fear. It was the kind of tremor that comes after you've held yourself together for too long, after the adrenaline fades and your body finally realizes something irreversible has happened. This all went down 2 weeks ago, and I'm still processing it. My name is Elena Morales. I'm 29 years old. I work operations for Cole Hospitality Development here in Austin, the company my father built from nothing 15 years ago. We develop and renovate hotels across Texas and New Mexico. It's not glamorous work. It's schedules, contracts, progress payments, and contingency plans. It's making sure projects don't collapse quietly while everyone's pretending they're fine. Before I joined the family business, I worked at a construction software firm. That's where I learned how this industry really runs, not on vision boards or charisma, but on documentation, leverage, and follow-through. I joined Cole Development 3 years ago, not because I was the owner's daughter, but because I already knew how to keep a project alive when everyone else was panicking. 7 months ago, I thought I was getting married. His name is Marcus Hale. He's 31, freelance PR, image management, reputation repair, the kind of guy who can read a room in 10 seconds and tell you exactly what people want to hear and exactly what they're afraid of. I used to admire that about him. I told myself it meant he was emotionally intelligent. Looking back, I think he just understood optics better than honesty. Marcus's parents are Randall and Bethany Hale. Randall owns Hale Millworks and Design, an architectural millwork company that specializes in hotel lobbies and executive lounges. The craftsmanship is beautiful, genuinely, but they'd been struggling with cash flow for over a year before I came into the picture. Bethany is Bethany. If you live in Austin long enough, you know the type. Charity boards, fundraisers, public smiles, private judgments. She always spoke in the plural. Our standards, our expectations, our circle, as if individuality were something you outgrew once you had money. From the beginning, there was this quiet assessment happening whenever I was around them. Not outright hostility, not insults, just measurement. When Marcus and I got engaged, I thought the tension would ease, that once I was officially chosen, I'd be treated like family. Instead, the scrutiny sharpened. They asked about venues that were 3 times our budget, guest lists that included people neither Marcus nor I actually knew, floral arrangements that cost more than my first car. Every suggestion was framed as a correction, an upgrade, something necessary to reflect the family appropriately. What they never said out loud, at least not yet, was that I was the thing they felt needed upgrading. At the time, I didn't realize how much power I was already holding. I just thought I was trying to be generous. I didn't realize I was crossing a line when I advocated for Randall's company. At the time, it felt reasonable, logical even. Cole Development was renovating a historic hotel in San Antonio, a full lobby overhaul, executive lounge, custom millwork throughout the public spaces. It was a high-visibility project, the kind that gets photographed for industry publications and quietly judged by competitors who pretend they're not paying attention. Hale Millworks bid aggressively. Their proposal wasn't the cheapest, but it wasn't outrageous either, and the craftsmanship, at least on paper, was solid. Randall knew his materials. He knew finishes. He knew how to talk about legacy and permanence in a way developers like to hear. I pushed for them. Not recklessly, not blindly. I argued that supporting a local millwork firm with proven artistry would strengthen the project narrative, that keeping the work regional would help with timeline coordination, that the numbers made sense. I did not say I'm marrying his son. I didn't need to. The contract came in at $1.2 million. Standard protections were included: quality control gates, progress payments tied to verified milestones, and one clause that almost no one ever thinks about once the ink dries: termination for convenience, with an $85,000 kill fee. It's industry standard, boring even. Basically, if Cole Development decided to end the contract for any reason that wasn't Hale's fault, we'd pay $85,000 and walk away. Clean exit. No litigation, no drama. Most vendors never expect it to be triggered. The early deposits changed everything for Randall. They rehired crews they'd laid off months earlier, reopened credit lines with suppliers who had started asking uncomfortable questions, paid down enough debt to breathe again. Within a month, his posture changed. He walked taller, spoke louder, started dropping comments about how this project really saved us. Bethany began floating ideas about how our wedding should now reflect the families involved. Plural. That was the first word that started bothering me. Families. Because somehow, despite the fact that I was the one who worked the spreadsheets, reviewed the bids, and pushed the approval through internal committees, I was never spoken about as an equal partner. I was spoken about as an accessory. Marcus didn't correct them. When Bethany suggested we upgrade the venue to an estate in the hill country, triple the cost of what Marcus and I had already agreed on, he squeezed my hand under the table and said, "Let's just hear her out." When Randall joked that these kinds of weddings aren't really starter level, Marcus laughed. I told myself he was just trying to keep the peace. I told myself love meant compromise. But there was a moment, quiet, easy to miss, when I realized something was wrong. It was when Bethany said, "Well, now that our businesses are aligned, it just makes sense to present a united front." Aligned. That night, lying in bed next to Marcus, I stared at the ceiling and wondered why my chest felt tight. I had grown up around contracts, around negotiations, around people who smiled while quietly calculating leverage. I should have recognized the shift. Instead, I convinced myself it was pre-wedding stress. 6 days before the wedding, we went to a rehearsal wine tasting at a hill country winery. Everything felt pleasant, surface-level polite, seating charts, menu options, which cousins absolutely could not be seated together, normal things. I let myself relax. That was my mistake, because Bethany waited until everyone had a glass in their hand before she made her announcement. She said they'd found a better venue, an estate, prestigious, expensive, the kind of place people whispered about approvingly, and she said we needed to switch, not because it was nicer, but because it would reflect our family's standing appropriately. I said calmly that Marcus and I had already agreed on our budget, that we were happy with the venue we'd chosen. I wasn't rude. I wasn't emotional. I was firm. Randall set his glass down and looked at me like he was finally done pretending. "Elena," he said, "you're a good woman, truly. But let's be honest, you're not really on Marcus's level. This family has standards." I looked at Marcus. I waited. He didn't say anything. Then he glanced at his wine and said, "Maybe we should just call off the wedding." I nodded. I put my glass down. I walked to the host station, paid the entire bill for everyone, and left. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't cry. I just walked out. And in the parking lot, sitting alone in my car, I made a phone call that changed everything. I sat in my car for a full minute before I turned the engine on. Not because I was stunned. I wasn't. Not because I was heartbroken. Not yet. It was because something inside me had gone very still. There's a moment, sometimes, when humiliation doesn't explode outward. It collapses inward. Everything sharp and loud disappears, and what's left is a kind of cold clarity. That's where I was sitting in that parking lot. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone to vent. I didn't even wipe my eyes. I just stared at the steering wheel and replayed the last 10 minutes over and over. You're not really on Marcus's level. This family has standards. Maybe we should just call off the wedding. Marcus hadn't defended me. Not once. Not even reflexively. No, Dad, that's not fair. No awkward laugh. No attempt to soften the blow. Silence is a choice. And his silence told me exactly where I stood. I started the car and pulled out of the lot. My hands were steady. My breathing was slow. That scared me more than if I'd been shaking. I drove for maybe half a mile before I reached for my phone. I didn't call a friend. I didn't call Marcus back. I called my father. He picked up on the second ring. "Elena," he said, "everything okay?" I didn't give him the long version. I didn't need to. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice even, "remember the termination for convenience clause in the Hale Mill Works contract?" There was a pause. Not confusion, recognition. "Yes," he said carefully. "Why?" "I want to invoke it." Another pause, longer this time. "That's significant," he said. "It'll cost us money, and it'll create a logistics scramble. Are you absolutely sure this isn't personal?" I exhaled slowly. "It is personal," I said, "but it's also professional. I advocated for that contract in good faith. That goodwill was tied to a relationship they just made very clear they don't respect." Silence again. Then my father said something I will never forget. "Family comes first," he said, "but process comes right after. If you're sure, we'll do it the right way." "I'm sure," I said. We hung up. I drove home and slept for 3 hours. No nightmares, no tossing and turning, just deep, heavy sleep. Friday morning, Cole Development's legal team couriered a formal notice of termination for convenience to Hale Mill Works. Effective immediately. Kill fee. $85,000. Payable within 10 business days. By 10 a.m., my phone started ringing. Randall first, then Bethany, then Marcus. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I watched our internal Slack channel light up. Replacement vendor confirmed. Adjusted timeline approved. Project continuity maintained. I replied to the thread with one word: received. That afternoon, the calls kept coming. And that was when I started to wonder whether I had just destroyed a family business out of spite, or whether I had finally stopped letting people mistake my professionalism for weakness. I didn't have an answer yet, but I was about to. By noon on Friday, my phone felt like it had developed a pulse of its own. It buzzed on my desk, on the kitchen counter, on the passenger seat when I went out to grab coffee I didn't even want. I didn't answer any of it. At first, the voicemails were controlled, professional, almost polite. Randall's voice came through crisp and measured. "Elena, there must be some clerical error with this termination notice. Please call me back so we can sort this out." An hour later, the tone shifted. "Elena, the bank just froze our line of credit. We have materials on deposit and crews expecting payment. You need to call me back immediately." By mid-afternoon, the messages lost their structure altogether. "We can't make payroll without the next progress payment," Randall said, his voice thinner now, less certain. "Please, call me back." I listened to each voicemail once, then archived them. I wasn't being cruel. I was being careful. Because every time I thought about responding, my mind went back to that winery, to the casual way they had told me I wasn't good enough, to the silence that followed when I looked to Marcus for support. Goodwill has an expiration date. Marcus called at 10:47 that night. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment before answering. His voice cracked as soon as I said hello, uneven, strained, like he was forcing emotion through clenched control. "Elena," he said, breath hitching in short bursts, "this was just a stupid fight. How could you do this? Do you have any idea how many people work for my dad?" I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes. "Marcus," I said, "your family looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't worthy of you. You didn't disagree." "That's not what I meant." "The goodwill that came with our relationship," I continued, "ended when you ended our relationship." There was a pause. When he spoke again, the rawness was gone. His voice was steadier, measured, professional. "Okay," he said, "let's slow this down. We can tell your dad this was emotional stress, pre-wedding panic, people fight. We can reverse this, and we can work on fixing us." There it was. Damage control. I asked him something that had been sitting heavy in my chest for months. "Marcus," I said quietly, "are you loving me, or are you pricing me?" Silence. Not static, not confusion. Calculation. Then the line went dead. Saturday morning, Bethany showed up at my door. I didn't invite her in. I recorded the conversation. Texas is a one-party consent state, and by then, I understood that documentation wasn't paranoia. It was protection. She went straight for guilt. The workers, their families, Christmas coming. How devastated Marcus was. She said I was destroying a family business over a misunderstanding. Then she straightened her posture, folded her hands, and said calmly, "Marcus is keeping the engagement ring. After what you've put this family through, consider it compensation for emotional damages." I didn't argue. I didn't react. I just listened and kept recording. Because by then, I was starting to understand something important. This wasn't about emotions. It was about entitlement. By Monday morning, I thought the worst of it was over. The calls had slowed. The voicemails had stopped coming in waves. There was a fragile quiet to the weekend that made me believe everyone had finally accepted reality, that the contract was gone, the wedding was over, and whatever damage had been done was now fixed in place. I was wrong. Just after 9, Cole Legal called. Not panicked, not rushed. "Careful," Elena, the attorney said. "We were processing the termination paperwork and doing our routine internal review. We found something odd in change order number 4. I pulled my chair closer to my desk. "What kind of odd?" "There's a request for a $120,000 advance payment," he said, "supposedly approved and digitally signed by your father." My stomach tightened. "My dad wouldn't approve that without routing it through operations," I said immediately, "and I would have seen it." "That's what concerned us," he replied. "The signature matches his name, but the audit trail doesn't match his authorization patterns." Silence stretched between us. "We're not accusing anyone of a crime," he added carefully, "but we are flagging this as a potential irregularity. We've notified Hale's bank and primary suppliers that the documentation is under review." When the call ended, I sat very still. This wasn't about a broken engagement anymore. This was about someone forging approval to keep a failing business afloat. 2 hours later, an email landed in my inbox. It was from Tom, the shop foreman at Hale Mill Works. He was 45, 20 years in the trade. The kind of man who signs his emails with his full name because he stands behind his work. His message was short. Elena, I just quit. Randall told me to downgrade the wood grade on the next shipment to save money. It won't meet fire rating specs for public hotel spaces, and it definitely doesn't meet what your contract requires. I can't put my name on substandard work. Thank you for believing in us when you pushed for this job. I'm sorry it ended like this. I read the email 3 times. Then I stared at my screen until my eyes burned. This wasn't a vendor dispute. This wasn't revenge. This was a man being asked to choose between his integrity and his paycheck. I forwarded Tom's email to Cole Legal and copied our owner's representative on the San Antonio project. No commentary, no emotion, just documentation. I didn't post anything online. I didn't warn anyone in the industry. I didn't reach out to Marcus or his parents. But information has a way of moving quietly through construction circles. By Wednesday, I heard through a mutual contact that a major general contractor had removed Hale Mill Works from their approved vendor list. No announcement. No explanation. Just a silent administrative decision. The missed calls from Marcus's family stopped after that. I think they finally understood something had shifted, not emotionally, but structurally. That night, alone in my apartment, I listened again to Bethany's recorded voice. The guilt, the entitlement, the casual assumption that consequences were negotiable. And for the first time, I realized the truth. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had stepped out of the way and let their own decisions finally catch up to them. I thought the silence meant they were regrouping. I didn't realize it meant they were rewriting me. It started quietly, the way reputations usually unravel. A friend forwarded me a screenshot from a neighborhood Facebook group I wasn't even part of. The post didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. Some people use power to punish others when they don't get their way. Imagine destroying a family business over wedding stress. The comments were worse. Speculation. Assumptions. Amateur psychoanalysis from people who had never met me, but felt very comfortable deciding who I was. By the end of the day, I heard Bethany had been telling her version of the story at charity board meetings, at luncheons, anywhere there was an audience that already believed she was generous and well-meaning. According to her, I was controlling, vindictive, a woman who couldn't handle being told no, someone who used a business contract to emotionally blackmail her family after Marcus stood up for himself. It was character assassination, clean, strategic, and designed to spread just far enough to hurt without ever touching anything provable. I didn't respond. Not once. Coal Development didn't either. When an industry publication reached out asking about the termination, our statement was exactly 11 words long. Contract terminated for convenience per standard terms. Replacement vendor engaged. No further comment. That contrast mattered more than anything I could have said. On one side, emotional accusations, gossip, and outrage. On the other, documentation, process, and silence. People in our industry noticed. Meanwhile, Tom didn't stop at one email. 2 days after he quit, he sent another message, this one with attachments. Photos of packing lists, purchase orders, material specifications. He had documentation showing the lower grade wood Randall wanted to substitute lacked the flame spread certification required for public hotel spaces. Not a gray area, not a judgment call, a clear safety violation. I forwarded everything to Cole Legal and our owner's rep. Again, no commentary. Again, no emotion. I didn't leak it. I didn't hint. I didn't even tell my father the details, just that legal was handling a compliance issue. But information moves fast when it's credible. Within 2 weeks, another general contractor quietly removed Hale Mill Works from their approved vendor list. No announcement. No explanation. Just a silent update in a shared database. Their bank moved their accounts into what's called special assets monitoring, which is a polite way of saying we no longer trust you. And still, Bethany kept telling people I was the villain. What she didn't realize was that the louder she got, the calmer I became. Because for the first time, I could see the entire pattern clearly. They didn't lose control because I acted. They lost control because their leverage was gone. And without leverage, all they had left was noise. The engagement ring became the next battlefield, not because I wanted it back for sentimental reasons. I didn't. By that point, the ring felt like evidence from someone else's life, something that belonged in a file folder, not a jewelry box. But Bethany had made a mistake when she said it out loud at my door. Marcus is keeping the engagement ring. That sentence mattered, because legally, an engagement ring isn't a consolation prize. It's not compensation. It's not payment for emotional damages. It's a conditional gift, given in contemplation of marriage. No marriage means the condition fails. I retained a civil attorney. not anyone affiliated with Cole Development. I wanted this clean and separate. She sent a formal demand letter to Marcus requesting the return of the ring, along with the original appraisal and purchase documentation. $9,500. Clear paper trail. Straightforward law. Marcus ignored it. Completely. So my attorney filed a claim in small claims court. Marcus responded the way I should have expected, with a 3-page email. It wasn't addressed to my attorney. It was addressed to me. Accusatory, emotional, carefully structured to make me feel cruel. He wrote about how his parents were losing their home, about how I was kicking them while they were down, about how the ring was the only valuable thing he had left, how keeping it was justified given the damage I had caused. I forwarded the entire email to my attorney without responding, because in the middle of all that emotional language was a simple admission. He had the ring, and he intended to keep it. At the same time, I did something I didn't tell anyone about. I reached out quietly to the replacement millwork vendor on the San Antonio project. I recommended Tom and 2 other senior craftsmen from Hale's shop. All 3 were hired immediately. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't use it to counter Bethany's narrative. I just knew those men deserved to keep working. Marcus's family had no idea I did this. They were too busy telling anyone who would listen that I was heartless. 2 weeks later, I drove through their neighborhood to visit a friend. There was a for sale sign on their lawn. That same afternoon, I received a cease and desist letter accusing me of tortious interference with Hale Millworks business relationships. It came from a strip mall law office I'd never heard of. Cole Legal's response was brief. They cited Clause 14, termination for convenience. They noted standard industry practice. They stated there was no legal basis for the claim. And then they closed the file. For the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel defensive. I felt detached, like I was watching consequences play out in real time, not because I pushed them, but because I stepped aside. By the time the small claims hearing arrived, I was exhausted in a very specific way. Not angry, not anxious. Just done. The courtroom looked exactly like every small claims courtroom I'd ever seen in photos. Fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. Folding chairs lined up too close together. A judge who looked like he had already heard 50 versions of the same story that morning and was hoping the next one would be shorter. Marcus showed up alone. No lawyer, no parents. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just stripped of the confidence he used to wear like armor. When it was his turn to speak, he stood and launched into a long, emotional explanation. About love. About betrayal. About how I had abandoned him and his family in their darkest moment. He said the ring was compensation for emotional damage, that he had suffered, that I had acted out of spite. The judge listened, expressionless. Then my attorney stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue feelings. She laid out facts. Engagement date, ring purchase receipt, original appraisal, text messages confirming the wedding was called off, demand letters requesting the ring's return, Marcus's own email admitting he had the ring and intended to keep it. It took maybe 5 minutes. The judge looked down at the paperwork, then back up at Marcus. An engagement ring, he said flatly, is a conditional gift given in contemplation of marriage. No marriage means the ring is returned to the purchaser. He paused. You have 10 business days. That was it. No lecture, no moral ruling. Just the law. A week later, my attorney called to tell me the ring had arrived at her office. It came in a cheap padded envelope. No note, no message. Just the ring I had spent 3 months choosing. Now feeling like an artifact from a life I no longer recognized. The long-term consequences were harder to watch than I expected. Hale Millworks didn't recover. Without credit lines, without approved vendor status, without trust, they couldn't secure new projects. 4 months after the termination, they shut down completely. Randall signed a civil settlement with one supplier to avoid a larger lawsuit. Their house sold below asking price. They moved into a rental townhouse across town. Bethany quietly stepped down from every charity board she had once ruled. Marcus pivoted to doing PR for a yoga studio. As far as I know, he never tried to contact me again. And me? I moved into a small apartment near Lady Bird Lake. I started seeing a therapist, not just to unpack the breakup, but to understand why I had tolerated being diminished for so long. I stepped away from personal social media for 2 months. Instead of scrolling, I started hiking hill country trails on weekends. I volunteered with a nonprofit that repairs roofs for senior citizens. Physical work, honest work, the kind that clears your head. At work, I led a 4-month rollout for a hotel chain in Denver. It went smoothly. Clean execution, no drama. When I came back to Austin, my dad said something over dinner that stuck with me. Family first, he said, but process first too. You honored both. I just nodded. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Last week, I stopped by the San Antonio Hotel to see how the renovation turned out. The lobby was almost finished. Tom and the new millwork crew were installing the final panels. Everything to specification, everything built to last. Clean lines, solid joins, no shortcuts. Standing there, I got a text from an unknown number. Thanks for the referral. It was Tom. I texted back, do good work. Walking out of that lobby, something finally clicked. Marcus's family had told me I would never be good enough for him. Turns out the only thing I needed to raise was my boundaries. I'm doing fine now. Better than fine. Sometimes the most important gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they are when they think they have power over you. Thanks for listening.